Happy day everyone. Today our class is going to be on Karl Marx, the German philosopher. He, as you all know, is the founder of communism and a great philosopher for his times. We should always remember the time a man existed, the time frame when the philosopher was talking about in order to understand the concepts that he talked about better. So Marx was born in 1818 and died at the age of 75. In England, almost an embittered man at the end of his life. But it did not start like that. He was a German philosopher who was born in Netherlands, then went on to live in Brussels, was exiled 3 times from Paris and Brussels and Netherlands, and then he was finally settling in England. So originate in Germany and then went on to live in England and die in England, where he is buried at the Highgate Cemetery. The Germans are very proud to have such a wonderful philosopher among them, and all sociologists, irrespective of where we come from, are always inspired by the thoughts that Karl Marx has espoused for. Now, Karl Marx sociology has always been the sociology of class struggles, and in fact, according to Marx, class is the manifestation of economic differentiation. That is why I have made the PPT where the people are, the proletariat or the have-nots are more, and the bourgeois, who he terms as capitalists, are less in number, though dominant in nature. So the famous opening sentence of Communist Manifesto of the 1848 says, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle." So the class struggle is one of the major concepts that Karl Marx has espoused, and today we are going to see what he meant by class struggle and how the process of class struggle happens. So first he talks about what are classes. So he says they are the groups of people, they have their own role to play in the relations of production. Now what do you mean by relations of production? When anybody has access to production, mostly manufacturers or people with high economic means are part of the means of production. So that is the capacity of the rich people to own the means of production. And the opposite holds good for the labor classes. The labor classes are people who only own the means of labor. Their own labor is what the labor classes own. So capital is the instrument invested out of which profit can be derived. And what happens to the others? Those who possess capital, they are the owners of the capital or the money or the investment or the economic rights of the people. And the laborers, they only own their own labor. So always there is this difference between the capitalists and the laborers, where capital gets profit and labor will get the wages. So labor and capital are always they are always interrelated. They can never be separated from each other, and they can never be thought of as separated from each other. They are inseparable, and also one cannot exist without the other. So under the theory of class struggle, he always thought of, the classes are related to the 3 sources of income. Owners of simple power of laborers, whose main source of income is only labor. Then the owners of capital or the capitalists, or who he calls as the bourgeois, whose main source of income is the profit or the surplus that the laborers produce, and the landowners, whose main source of income is from the land that they own or the rent that they collect. Now at a broader level, he says classes can be divided into 2, that is the haves and the have-nots. The haves are people who have everything in their life. They have economic power, political power, and money. Now, the have-nots are people who do not have much in their life other than their own labor, which can be linked to whatever they own. So, he calls the people who own capital as bourgeoisie, and the people who don't own anything other than their labor as the proletariats. So, Marx theory is basically about the conflict between the bourgeoisie and the proletariats. So Marx is, for Marx, a social class always a fixed place. It cannot be changed. There are different kinds of stratification in society, where class is one of the major stratifications that Marx talks about. Now under theory of class struggle, again we further go down into Marx says he's defined what, the stages are in human history, whereas in the beginning you come to basic primitive communism, or different kinds of modes of production existed, in which Marx has divided it into 4, which he calls the Asiatic, the ancient, the feudal and the capitalist. Now, and all this will culminate in one stage called communism. So, let us go into detail as to what he calls as Asiatic, what he calls as ancient. So, under that, to further understand what he means by each of this, let us look at the next thing which he calls as the various stages in the modes of production. So, first is primitive communal, which is called as Asiatic, which is the primitive communal means we were in the stage in the beginning of the human history when we had very little implements to, to even look at our agriculture. There was no agriculture in the fixed land that we had. There was no, the hunting gathering stage that we call, that is what he means by the primitive communal stage, where the implements that we used were very, very basic. It was very rudimentary implements like sticks, and we had all these wooden implements and all that, which did not have much, which did not require much talent, or did not require much of experimentation, or did not require too much of skills to prepare. So what happens is that there was no monopoly of production, means of production. So ultimately in this stage it was mutual cooperation. It was, forces had to be used against the natural calamities or against the dangers that the common people faced and all that. So at this stage it was more about cooperation and being together. And basically there was no exploitation at this stage or monopoly on any of the agricultural implements at this stage, because mainly for 2 reasons. First was the tools used, as I told you earlier, was very, very rudimentary, very basic, like sticks and all that. So bow and arrow and all that. So no one had any monopoly of the production over the tools of production. Then the second was production was at such a low rate, there was no mass production or anything. It was just subsistence. So if I needed some food, I had to get it. If I needed some implements, I had to make it. So in that stage, competition was not that severe. So then what happened is that everybody was working to produce common goods. So definitely there was no competition among them. So there was no exploitation also, because monopoly, that is the key word here, monopoly was not in the hands of anyone. So nobody was monopolizing the means of production. So it was a situation of no master and no servant. So what happened after a point of time, slowly man started perfecting his tools. He started getting a better kind of implements to make. And that is when it resulted in the next stage, which he calls as slave owning. Now here, primitive tools that we were using earlier, like spear and stick and all that, gave rise to bronze and iron implements. Slowly sickles started coming in, spades were used, even the bow and arrows were perfected into metals. So all these things, when it was done, what happened? Large scale agricultural implements had to be created. So these kind of things started creating a sense of competition in the hearts of people. The slave owners started literally owning the means of production, that is the slaves themselves. And here what happened is that the slaves were given only the bare minimum necessities just to keep them out of starvation. They were not treated in a very well-mannered way. So the history of exploitation starts here, and therefore the history of class struggle also starts at this stage. Now with the passage of time, the classes started slowly getting together, and all the classes, like for example the proletariats or the working class, became one, and the other class or the slave owning community started gathering itself in a particular community. So it became slave owners and the slave themselves, which again led to further evolution called the feudal system. Now the feudal system is, for the first time again, man started using inanimate sources of energy. Till then it was only labor or human beings that were treated as labor. But at this point of time, wind and water and all such things started becoming sources of energy. And at that point what happens? It started substituting human labor. That is the change that happened in the feudal system. Now the relationship was based on the kind of serfs they owned, or the slaves they owned became the serfs. It was almost kind of a bonded labor system where generations of people were working for the upper class or the slave owning community. This stage was better than the previous stage because they could own the implements that they had, the peasants could own the implements that they were using, as well as cultivate the land that they had. Although it was small in size, they could still cultivate that land. But they still had, the forces of production underwent a lot of changes because of this discovery, and demand of consumption, it was caused by population increase that happened in the middle of the 19th century, as well as a lot of colonization that was also happening during this time. England, Germany, France, Spain, all these countries started colonizing different parts of the world, like Asia and Africa came to be completely colonized by these forces from Europe. And due to these discoveries, as well as the Industrial Revolution also, which was going on around that time, a lot of changes started happening in the European communities, and a new concept called a factory system started evolving in that point of time. And that is why I have mentioned it in red, because that was a major turning point in the history of mankind. Factory system came, the unorganized laborers were all brought into one place, the factory, and which gave them an opportunity to organize themselves and stage a very violent protest, or even a very calm protest. Whatever it is, the protest became very systematized kind of protest. Then, because of all these, the two distinct classes started evolving at this point of time, and the capitalist system started coming into a real time basis. You know, capitalism for the first time evolved as a system of governance, where the means of production was owned by the capitalists, as well as economic power was also in the hands of a few. So the simple system of slave owning and slaves became into capitalist and proletariats. That is when the simple system started evolving into a very complex system. Under capitalism, the proletariat here, or the worker here, is legally free. He was not bound by any contract. He could go and work for any capitalist, but the exploitation continued in the way they were compelled to sell their labor. And the power was only in the hands of the capitalist. The laborers had to continually go and work for very bad, inhuman conditions, and also sell their labor at a very, very low price. That was the concept that was demanded from them. That was a very that started the working class movement itself. This particular age started the working class movement. It began with bargaining for better wages, better working conditions, and also culminated into an intensified class conflict. And that is when it was aimed at overthrowing the system itself. The capitalist system itself came with the danger of being overthrown by the working class. And he said, Marx was at the apex of this, and he said that the capitalist system symbolizes the most acute form of inequality, exploitation, and class antagonism. Now, theory, the final stage in the class struggle, comes out as the communist stage, where everybody will be equal. Equality will exist in society, and society itself will cease to exist, because everybody will lose its relevance. There will be no governance required, because everybody will own everything and nobody will own anything. So it is a very paradoxical statement which Marx has given. So based on this only, his theory of class struggle is. Now let us look at the process by which he wants to say all these. This is actually the theory of class struggle, but how he has come to the conclusion is through a process, and this analysis can be summarized in about 10 statements that we have, which is, the first one is, there is always the importance of property. Property is very important as far as Marx is concerned. So that is why he is always stressing on the production, the forces of production, relations to forces of production. All those things are being stressed, because what can be produced is owned by a few people. And the actual production is done by the laborers, but they do not own the system. So that is why importance is always given to property. So the first concept that Marx talks about in his theory of class struggle, which can be summarized as first point as the importance of property. The second one is economic determinism. Now the economic determinism itself, what do you mean by economic determinism? Anything in society is determined by the economic nature only. So money is all important as far as Marx is concerned. So he is saying that the economic power that the capitalist or the bourgeois has what they do is they use it to further their interest in the political sphere as well. So, ultimately, the people who have a lot of money, the economic power will become part of the political power as well. In the sense that they will own the political parties also. So, the military, the economic power, the judiciary power, all these things will come together, and these all are substitute for capitalists. So, capitalists ultimately take over the power of a country, and the laborers are left with no power at all. Other than the labor that they have, they do not have anything. So, that is the economic determinism. Then, as a result of this, the next point comes as polarization of classes. Now, I am part of one particular class. What will happen? I will want to be friends with all the people in my class only. So, the same way, if it is a capitalist, all the capitalists, they come together, they all form a particular group, they belong to particular clubs, they are all part of the same social activities. So, one class is formed there. The other class, the laborers, they also have their own way. Like if you see two people meeting, they will be talking about their boss, or I am sure students talk about the teachers like that. If you have a particular labor class, they will be talking about their manager, or they will be talking about their owners. So, these two classes slowly become antagonistic towards each other. And Marx is very particular that it is not only these two classes, there are the middle classes also. There are the petty bourgeoisie, he calls them, because they are the small capitalists. And the other one is, he calls it as lumpen proletariat, which is, they are also part of the labor class, but they still own a little bit of land and all that stuff. So, there are classes in between. Other than bourgeois, there is petty bourgeoisie. Other than proletariat, there are lumpen proletariat also. But he says when there is a violent revolution, or when there is some sort of revolution happening against the capitalists, the other two in between would also lose their rights. And they will be part of the proletariats only. So, capitalists will be separate and all the others will join the proletariats when the revolution happens. That is his concept. So, the polarization of classes will happen over a period of time, which will lead to the theory of surplus value. Now, the theory of surplus value is nothing but, it's a very simple concept that Marx has said. He says that if I work for 5 hours to produce something that I want to, like suppose it is take a small example of a pen or something like that. To produce a pen, I require only 5 hours of my time, whereas the total amount of time that I am working is 10 hours. So, in 10 hours actually I can produce 2 pens, but the wage I am getting is only for producing 1 pen. So, what happens? The 1 pen that I am producing extra, or the 5 hours of work that I am contributing is an extra work. So, that he calls as surplus profit. And where will this surplus profit go? This will go to the capitalist only. So, I am being paid for only 1 pen, whereas I am producing 2 pens. So, that 1 pen is going as profit to the capitalist. So, that is the theory of surplus value. So, when there is this surplus value for any product that I am creating, naturally I am at a disadvantage, but the capitalist will be earning more and more profit. So, that is what he calls as theory of surplus value, which will lead to pauperization again. Here Marx is very, very clear that pauperization does not happen because there are scarce resources. It is because of exploitation. Now, the theory of surplus value tells you how so many extra hours of work I am putting in. That many hours of work, if it was paid to me, then I will not become a pauper. But if I am paid only for that 5 hours of labor, whereas I am working for 10 hours, that slowly will create that exploitation in me, and I will be forced to become poorer than I am today. So, over a period of time, I become poor, I become a pauper, I do not have any other means of sustenance other than the labor that I have. So, that is what he says by pauperization. The next point he calls is alienation. Alienation is, man in the modern world, he is, again and again I am reiterating this point that Karl Marx existed during the beginning stages of the Industrial Revolution, where the factory system started and the assembly line production started. So, what happens is, over a period of time, the worker starts getting alienated from the product that he is producing. He does not get fulfillment in his work. He is slowly being alienated from the labor that he is doing itself. How? Because just imagine an assembly line production of a car factory. Now I am in charge of producing the engine. Another room will be in charge of producing the door. Another completely different area will be producing the paint, and another may be producing screws and all these small bolts and all those things, steering wheel and all that. So I don't know what the other person is producing, and I don't know what the final product is going to look like. So my duty is only to produce the engine. So I don't know what it is going to be used for, how the look of the car is going to be, all those things I don't know. So I am being alienated from the product that I am producing. So the look and the function both are being lost. So finally the charm of working and the fulfillment of my work does not come to me. So I am being alienated from my work. And I am so busy working for 8 to 10 hours. Those days the working hours were 10 to 12 hours per person. So suppose that continues, what will happen over a period of time? I don't have a social life at all. So I get alienated from the person standing even next to me. I don't even go for a cup of tea along with the worker that I am working with. I don't know who he is. So I get alienated from the worker who is next to me. I get alienated from myself because the work I am doing is not good. So alienation results in a lot of self-estrangement and irritation and frustration and all that on the part of the worker. So that is why alienation happens in especially the new kind of factory system. Then because of that, there is class solidarity and antagonism. This is almost like polarization of classes, where once these classes become solidified into particular bourgeois or proletariat or whatever the classes they are in, what happens is that automatically there is a kind of anger against the other class. So there is an antagonism towards the other classes. I have got solidarity within my class and antagonism against the other class. So definitely this antagonism will lead to class polarization and antagonism. So there is solidarity within your class, antagonism against your class. That is what happens at this stage, which leads to a violent revolution. He says massive revolution can only create social change. And in this, because of this revolution, he says it could be a violent revolution, but violent revolution in the sense that the mode of government will be overthrown. It does not mean that all the proletariats will go and kill all the bourgeoisie. There is no mass killing and all that. It is only meaning that the existing system will be completely overthrown and a new system will come in its place, which he calls as the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is again a very transitory phase. He does not say that proletariats will take over and become dictators and will not let anybody else rule and all that. He says that it's a transitional phase where society has to change, where all the power that was in the hands of the capitalists is being taken away. That is why it is violently wrested away from them and leads to a very beneficial dictatorship of the proletariat to set up the new system that is going to come. So this point of dictatorship of the proletariat is going to be a transitory phase, a building phase upon which the next inauguration of the communist society can take place. Inauguration of communist society is when everybody will be treated as equal, society will become, the governance will become obsolete, society will wither away as it is known today, and everybody will be given something according to their need and will be taken something from people according to their ability. So to each according to his need and from each according to his ability. So all these concepts that Marx has said is usually criticized as being utopian, but it is wonderful to know that one person in the 19th century could envisage such a wonderful classless society. And Marx has always been an inspiration for youngsters. There is a lot of radical ideas that people always try to imitate from Marx, and the Marxian concepts never lose their significance or relevance, even though we are in the 21st century today. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.